They thought I was just collateral. But that night, everything they believed about my worth began to change.
My name is Zaria, and 10 minutes ago, my husband handed me over to settle a gambling debt. Not to the police. Not to a courtroom. Not to anything clean or lawful. To men who settle accounts in silence. Because in their world, women were treated like property, until I became the one thing they couldn't control. I expected a monster. I expected a dark room and a life of quiet agony, the kind you survive by shrinking into yourself until you forget what your own voice sounds like. I expected pain as payment. I expected to be used, discarded, forgotten. But when the tiger of the North Side stepped out of the shadows, he didn't reach for my body. He reached for my soul. He didn't buy a mistress. He bought a shield for a house full of broken children and a fortress that had forgotten how to breathe. Zaria Weston thought he was throwing out trash. Min-ho Kang thought he was acquiring an asset. They were both wrong. Because a woman with nothing left to lose is the only thing more dangerous than a man with everything to protect. This is the story of how a Barren discard became the heartbeat of an empire, and how an iron fire poker became more lethal than a hitman's bullet. The air in the South Side warehouse didn't just feel cold. It felt clinical. Like a morgue too clean for the kind of sin that happened inside it. The concrete floor was cracked like old bone, and my gray wool dress clung damply at the hem where slush had soaked through. My wrists were bound with coarse hemp rope, tight enough to remind me I wasn't in control, loose enough to keep me alive for the handoff. That was the point. To Arthur, I wasn't his wife anymore. I was a failed investment. A depreciating asset. A hollow vessel. A woman who couldn't give him what he wanted. He paced just beyond the reach of the dim overhead light, his cheap suit wrinkled, his collar stained with sweat and desperation. The warehouse smelled like rust, cold metal, and the kind of gin men drink when they're trying to drown their own shame. "You brought this on yourself," he hissed, voice cracking like a whip that couldn't decide if it wanted to punish me or convince him. "A man needs a legacy." He said legacy the way some men say God, like it excused every evil thought in their head. "If you can't give me a son," he continued, "you can at least give me the capital to start over." He didn't look at my face when he said it. Not really. His eyes kept flicking to the heavy steel doors at the far end of the warehouse, the way a man watches the shoreline for a storm he begged for and now fears. I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I had cried in private for years, silent tears into pillows, into bathroom sinks, into the seam of my own hand so no one would hear. But something about the rope around my wrists did something strange to my fear. It sharpened it. It stripped everything else away until all that was left was a clean, cold truth. Arthur wasn't just leaving me. He was selling the story of my worthlessness to someone who would pay for it. The doors groaned. Not a dramatic movie creak, an industrial complaint, metal scraping metal as if the building itself was trying to resist what was coming. A flurry of snow blew in, stinging my cheeks like tiny needles, and the temperature in the warehouse dropped so fast my breath turned white in front of me. And then the silence came. Not ordinary silence. The kind that falls when predators enter a room. Min-ho Kang didn't walk in like a man. He entered like a verdict. Tall. Controlled. Stillness wrapped around him like a coat. Behind him, a line of men in charcoal overcoats moved with the precision of a practiced unit, forming a wall of silent muscle. They didn't scan the room like nervous thugs. They claimed it like soldiers. Min-ho's eyes found me immediately. Sharp as a blade. Predatory, yes, but not hungry the way Arthur expected. Not the look of a man buying a body. The look of a man assessing a battlefield. "Is this the woman?" Min-ho's voice was low, a baritone that didn't need to rise to cut through a room. Arthur straightened too fast, like a dog hearing its master's keys. "Yes, Mr. Kang." Healthy, obedient, he swallowed, then added, almost joking, like it would make the shame taste better, just flawed in the one way that matters. He slid an envelope across a rusted table with trembling hands, trying to look casual. Trying to pretend this was business, not betrayal. Min-ho didn't even glance at the envelope. He stepped closer. The scent of expensive sandalwood and cold iron wrapped around me, And I realized, absurdly, that this man smelled like winter and money. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the fine texture of his leather gloves. Close enough that I could feel the heat of him against the cold air. His gloved thumb tilted my chin up. Arthur inhaled sharply behind me, like he expected me to flinch, to tremble, to show fear the way a worthless woman was supposed to. I didn't. I looked at Min-ho Kang with the raw, dignified grief I'd been carrying for years. The grief of doctors' offices and whispered condolences. The grief of baby showers I stopped attending. The grief of being told again and again that my body was the reason a man was allowed to treat me like I didn't belong in the world. For the first time, I saw something flicker in the tiger's eyes. Not pity. Recognition. Not a flaw, he murmured, so quietly only I could hear it. A survivor. Those two words landed in me like a match in dry tinder. Survivor. Not barren. Not useless. Not broken. Survivor. Min-ho lifted his hand, just one subtle motion, and one of his men set a suitcase down with a heavy thud. The sound was obscene in the empty warehouse. Arthur lunged for it like a starving man, clawing the latches open. The cash inside wasn't just money, it was Arthur's religion. His salvation. His excuse. Min-ho didn't look at him. He looked at me. Then, with a smoothness that felt practiced, he pulled a silver pocket knife from his coat. One clean slice. The rope fell away. My wrists burned where the fibers had pressed, and I stared down at my hands like I'd forgotten what freedom looked like. Walk, Min-ho said. He didn't offer me his arm. He didn't guide me. He didn't soften his tone. He simply gave me a command that wasn't about control, it was about choice. He expected me to find my own feet. For a second, I stood there, stunned by the unfamiliar shape of dignity. Then I lifted my chin and stepped forward, past Arthur, who was still counting money like it could replace the part of him he'd sold to get it. As I crossed the threshold into the night, snow biting at my skin, I realized something that made my stomach twist and my spine straighten at the same time. I hadn't been sold. Not really. I'd been drafted. Into a different kind of war. The drive to the north side was a blur of neon lights, frozen sidewalks, and silent terror. Inside the black SUV, the leather was too soft, the heater too loud, the air too clean. It felt wrong, like stepping into a church right after crawling out of a gutter. I clutched my small Bible against my chest, the only thing I'd managed to keep. The cover was worn, the edges frayed, but it was mine. Proof that somewhere in me, there was still a person who believed she deserved to be held by something gentle. Min-ho sat rigidly beside me, staring out at the Chicago skyline as if he were calculating its weight. He didn't speak. His silence wasn't empty. It was loaded. I swallowed, forcing air into lungs that felt too tight. I am not a maid, I said, my voice trembling but clear. And if you expect me to be a mistress, you should have left me in the cold. Min-ho turned his head slowly. A ghost of a smirk touched his mouth, not warm, not cruel. Like he'd heard something honest for the first time in a long while. I have no shortage of women who want my bed, he said. I have a shortage of people who can handle my ghosts. He let that sit between us like smoke. You're here, he continued, because you have nothing left to lose. My throat tightened. That makes you dangerous, he said. And then, softer, but somehow sharper. That makes you useful. I wanted to hate him for the word useful. But the truth was, in Arthur's world, I hadn't even been useful. I'd been a disappointment. At least this man was honest about what he was doing. The SUV turned, and iron gates rose out of the night like the ribs of some sleeping beast. They groaned as they opened, not welcoming us, warning us. Beyond them, the mansion appeared. Gothic. Obsidian dark. So perfectly carved it looked unreal, like it had been summoned instead of built. Every window was a black eye watching our approach. The tires crunched over frozen gravel. My stomach dropped. Min-ho didn't look at me as we stopped. He looked ahead, as if he could already see the battlefield waiting inside his own home. Listen carefully, Zaria, he said at last, his voice calm in a way that felt dangerous. Whatever you think you're walking into. His eyes flicked to mine, quick, precise. It isn't a fairy tale. I tightened my grip on my Bible. Neither was my marriage, I whispered. And the SUV door opened, letting the cold in. as if the mansion itself exhaled, ready to see whether I would break or become the thing it had been missing. The mansion didn't welcome me. It assessed me. The front doors opened not with warmth, but with weight, thick oak panels swinging inward like the gates of a cathedral that had forgotten how to pray. Marble stretched in every direction. Black, white, veined like frozen lightning. Chandeliers dripped gold from ceilings so high they swallowed sound. It was beautiful and completely lifeless. The air inside was colder than the snow outside. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of cold that seeps into walls when laughter dies too young. Min-ho stepped inside first, removing his coat with mechanical precision. He didn't look back to see if I followed. He didn't need to. I stepped forward on my own. My shoes echoed across the marble-like intrusions, each step announcing that something foreign had entered the fortress. But the true chill didn't come from the stone. It came from the staircase. For children stood there, staggered by height like organ pipes in a cathedral of grief. They didn't look like children. They looked like statues carved from mourning. The eldest, Ji-hoon, stood at the top, maybe 12, chin lifted in a posture far too hardened for someone his age. His eyes were sharp, watchful, already wearing the armor of a man. Beside him, slightly lower, stood Hannah, 10 years old, pale and silent, her expression hauntingly blank. She didn't blink much, didn't move much. Like if she stayed still enough, the world might forget she existed. Below her was Sang-woo, quieter, smaller framed than the others. 8 years old, withdrawn into himself, fingers hooked into his sweater sleeve as if he were trying to disappear inside it. And at the bottom, little Yuna, the youngest. She clutched the banister with both hands, eyes wide and hollow, as if joy had been something she used to know but couldn't quite remember anymore. No one spoke. No one moved. They didn't look at me like I was a person. They looked at me like I was an object being installed. Min-ho shrugged out of his coat and handed it to a waiting staff member without breaking his gaze from the children. "They've had 3 nannies in 6 months," he said, voice echoing faintly in the vast foyer. The first quit in tears. The second was a spy. The third went mad from the silence. He finally glanced at me. "They don't want a mother. And they certainly don't want you." He stepped past me toward the staircase. "But you're going to stay," he finished. "Because if you survived a man like Arthur Weston, you can survive a house that forgot how to breathe." I looked back at the children. Really looked. And what I saw didn't scare me. It broke me. Because I recognized that look. The look of being unwanted. The look of being blamed for things you couldn't control. "They aren't statues, Mr. Kang," I said softly. His head tilted slightly. "They're just waiting for the ice to break." No one responded. But Yuna's fingers tightened on the banister. And Ji-hoon's eyes narrowed, not in hatred, but in calculation. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was being evaluated. My room in the East Wing was a gilded cage. Silk sheets. Mahogany furniture. Windows tall enough to make you feel small. Everything polished to perfection and devoid of life. I paced the rug that first night, my ears straining for sounds. Back on the south side, silence meant danger was coming. Here, silence was the danger. At midnight, a soft thud struck my door. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it felt audible. Slowly, carefully, I opened it. On the floor lay a single sheet of notebook paper. No footsteps retreating. No shadows in the hall. Just the paper. I picked it up. A drawing. Crude. Childlike. But devastating. A bird behind thick black bars. Its wings were tattered. Its eyes, 2 small red dots of ink, looked hollow. There was no name. No signature. But the message was unmistakable. "You are just like us. Trapped." I stood there a long time, holding that paper. And for the first time, I understood something critical. The children weren't just grieving their mother. They were guarding the fortress she left behind. And I was an intruder trying to occupy her throne. The next morning, I didn't go to the dining room. I went to the kitchen. It was professional grade. Stainless steel counters. Industrial ovens. Everything cold. Sterile. Precise. No warmth. No scent of home. The staff watched me with confusion as I tied back my hair and began searching cabinets. Flour. Yeast. Honey. I started kneading dough, pouring every ounce of humiliation, anger, grief, and stubborn refusal to break into the rhythm of my hands. Knead. Fold. Press. Again. 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 Until my arms burned. Until my breathing steadied. Until something human filled the room. Then it happened. The scent. Warm bread. Sweet honey. Comfort. It drifted through the vents, seeping into hallways that hadn't smelled like love in years. One by one, they appeared in the doorway. Yuna first. Then Sangwoo. Then Hannah, hovering in the back like a ghost unsure if it was allowed to haunt. Jihoon last, arms crossed, skeptical sentinel watching a possible invasion. I didn't look up. I just tore a piece of fresh bread, steam curling into the air, drizzled honey over it, and placed it on the island. In my house, I said quietly, not facing them, we didn't have marble. I wiped my hands slowly. But we always had bread. I paused. And no one ate alone. Then I walked out. Left them there. Left the offering behind like a peace treaty. When I returned an hour later, the plate was empty. Completely. And on the counter lay another drawing. The same bird. Same cage. But this time, the door was slightly open. Min-ho Kang lived by clocks and gunfire. His study was a command center, monitors displaying docks, warehouses, city blocks. An empire mapped in surveillance feeds. He watched the kitchen footage with a furrowed brow. He understood loyalty bought with fear. He understood obedience enforced with power. But this? Bread? Honey? He didn't understand softness as strategy. He intercepted me in the hallway that afternoon. You are wasting time, he said bluntly. I didn't bring you here to be a baker. Jihoon has entrance exams. Hannah hasn't spoken in a year. Fix it. I stepped closer. Close enough that his guards stiffened down the hall. You can command an army, Mr. Kang, I said calmly. But you can't command a heart. His eyes darkened. You've turned this house into a barracks, I continued. They don't need a general. They need to know they aren't invisible. Invisible, he scoffed. They are heirs to my name. They have your name, I corrected. They don't have your presence. The hallway went still. If you want me to fix them, I finished. Stay out of my way. His hand rose, hovered near my throat, then settled on my shoulder instead. Electric tension. Mutual defiance. A spark neither of us wanted to acknowledge. You have 1 month, he said quietly. If the silence isn't broken, I will use more traditional discipline. 1 month, I agreed. Eyes locked. War declared. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the library under the rolling ladder and began reading aloud. Not to anyone. Just to the air. A story about a girl who found a secret garden. Chapter after chapter, my voice steady, filling the cavernous room with something softer than silence. Halfway through the 3rd chapter. A rustle. Up on the balcony. 2 small green eyes peered through the railing. Hannah. I didn't acknowledge her. I just kept reading. And, for the first time, the mansion felt less like a tomb. Jihoon came next. I found him perched high in a window nook, war strategy books piled around him, a silver-framed photograph clutched in his lap. His mother. I climbed the ladder slowly, stopping below his level. She was beautiful, I whispered. He snapped the book shut violently. Don't talk about her. Pain disguised as anger. I didn't retreat. I know what it's like, I said gently, to stare at a photo and wish they'd step out and tell you everything will be okay. His jaw tightened. My father says silence is strength. Your father is terrified, I replied. That cracked him. Just slightly. He sees the life he couldn't protect every time he looks at you, I continued. So he treats you like a soldier, because he doesn't know how to grieve with a son. His knuckles whitened. He bought you, he whispered. You're just a debt. I extended my hand, open still. I've been a debt my whole life, Jihoon. I'd like to try being a person now. Silence stretched. And I think you're tired of being a weapon. He didn't take my hand. But he didn't reject it either. For him, that was progress. If Jihoon was a weapon, Hannah was a ghost. She drifted through hallways without sound, without voice, without presence. Until I found her in the conservatory. Glass walls. Dead orchids. Brittle ferns. A graveyard of plants that had given up trying to live. She sat on a stone bench staring at a withered rosebush. I didn't bring toys. I brought soil, bulbs, gloves, and silence. I sat far from her and began pruning dead growth. Snip, snip, snip. An hour passed before I spoke. My grandmother used to say some things need frost to bloom. No response. They bury themselves deep where the world can't touch them and wait until the ground softens. I slid a pot and an ugly brown bulb between us. Siberian iris, I said. It doesn't fear snow. Her hand moved. Slow, hesitant, then suddenly fierce. She grabbed the bulb and dug into the soil with bare hands, ignoring the dirt, the cold, everything. It wasn't gardening. It was survival. I placed my hand gently over hers. She didn't pull away. The silence didn't feel like a wall anymore. It felt like a bridge being built plank by plank. And for the first time since I arrived, the mansion breathed. The conservatory victory was quiet, but it was seismic. You don't always hear ice crack when it begins to melt. Sometimes you just notice the air feels different. Lighter, less hostile. Hannah still didn't speak, but she started sitting closer when I worked. Sangwoo began eating more when meals were shared instead of formal. Yuna started sleeping with her door open instead of locked. And Jihoon began watching me instead of guarding against me. Not trust. Not yet. But curiosity had replaced hostility. And in a house built on emotional lockdown, that was revolution. The contrast to that fragile healing lived miles south. Inside a place called the Onyx Lounge. If the conservatory smelled like rebirth, the lounge smelled like decay dressed in perfume. Velvet booths, neon purple lighting, cigar smoke hanging low like storm clouds. Arthur Weston sat hunched in a corner booth, gripping a whiskey glass so tightly his knuckles had gone bone white. He looked smaller now. Not physically, spiritually. The kind of man who had gambled away not just money, but identity. Across from him sat Silas, the broker. A man whose smile never reached his eyes. Eyes like polished obsidian, reflective but empty. You're difficult to track down, Arthur, Silas rumbled. Arthur swallowed hard. Been laying low. You owe the park syndicate $50,000, Silas continued calmly, and a pound of flesh. Arthur licked his lips. I have something better than money. That got Silas' attention. Arthur leaned forward, voice dropping. I know the tiger's weakness. Silas' eyebrow rose slightly. Not his docs. Not his accounts, Arthur whispered. The woman. Silas leaned back, amused. The Barren wife, he scoffed. Kang bought a toy. Why would he risk empire for a toy? Arthur shook his head quickly, desperation spilling through him. She's not a toy to those kids. She's the glue. I know Zaria. She'd die before letting anything happen to them. Silas' amusement dimmed slightly. Arthur pressed harder. And Kang, he's changed. He stays home now. Watches the estate, feeds himself. He's building a family. He slid a cocktail napkin onto the table. And a man with a family has something to lose. He began drawing. Service entrances. Camera blind spots. Guard rotations he'd overheard when he still lived inside her routines. The night shift changes at 3 a.m., Arthur whispered. 3-minute window in the east wing. Silas studied the map. Arthur's hand trembled as he finished the sketch. Take her, he said. Use her to pull the tiger out. Just give me my life back. Silas folded the napkin slowly, sliding it into his breast pocket. You've sold your soul twice now, Arthur, he murmured. First for greed. Now for fear. He stood. I wonder which one will kill you first. Arthur didn't answer. Because deep down, he already knew. Back at the estate, the air felt charged. Like the moment before lightning splits the sky. I walked the marble corridors barefoot, unable to sleep. The house had begun accepting me, but it still held secrets. I found myself outside Min-ho Kang's study. The door was slightly ajar. Amber light spilled onto the floor. I hesitated, then knocked lightly. Inside, he wasn't the tiger. He was just a man. Slumped at his desk. Shirt collar unbuttoned. Exhaustion carved into his posture. On the desk beside his glass of whiskey sat a small finger painting. A child's sun. Messy. Bright. Yuna's work. He hadn't framed it. Hadn't hidden it. He'd left it beside his weapon drawer like something sacred. He moved fast when I entered, hand flying to the desk drawer. Predator reflex. But when he saw it was me, the tension shifted. "You should be asleep," he said quietly. "And you should be human," I replied. I stepped closer, picking up the painting. "Ji-hoon waits at the window every night until your car pulls in," I said. "He's trying to be a soldier for you, but he's just a boy afraid his father will disappear like his mother did." Min-ho stood slowly. Towering. Dangerous. But not at me. "The park syndicate is moving," he said. "I can feel it." He stepped closer. "I brought you here to protect them. But the more I see you with them, the more I realize I've put a target on you." I didn't step back. "I've had a target on me since the day I married Arthur," I said calmly. I touched the gold edge of his watch. "For the first time. I'm protecting something that's mine." Silence stretched. "If this house is under siege," I finished, "then I'll hold the line." His hand rose slowly, hovered near my face, then brushed the curl at my temple. No words, but a vow formed in that quiet space. I wasn't his purchase anymore. I was his partner. The first sign of the storm was the silence of the birds. The estate grounds usually hummed with winter sparrows. That night, nothing. No wind chatter. No wings. Just stillness. At 2:00 a.m., the power died. Not flickered. Died. Absolute darkness swallowed the mansion whole. Backup generators should have activated in 3 seconds. They didn't. Arthur had traded the blueprint of my safety for survival. And the darkness he sold had arrived. I sat upright instantly, heart slamming. No hum of climate control. No hallway lights. Engineered blackout. I reached beneath my bed. My fingers closed around cold metal. The brass-tipped iron fire poker I'd hidden weeks ago, long before I trusted the estate's security more than my instincts. I moved silently into the hall. Halfway down the service corridor, I collided with a small, solid form. Ji-hoon. Baseball bat in hand. Face pale but steady. "They're inside," he whispered. Glass break in the kitchen. Fear flickered in his eyes, but not paralysis. I crouched to his level. "Take your sisters," I said calmly but firmly. "Pantry safe room. Behind the industrial fridge. You know the code." He nodded. "You are the man of this house until your father returns," I added. The words landed. His posture straightened. "Don't die," he whispered before disappearing into the dark. I watched him go, then turned toward the kitchen. The poker dragged lightly against the carpet behind me. From the servants' landing above the kitchen, I saw them. 3 intruders. Tactical gear. Professional movement. Flashlights slicing the dark like searchlights. Not burglars. Extraction team. "Where are the cubs?" one muttered. "Broker wants the kids. Woman's a bonus." Cold fury settled into my bones. They weren't here for wealth. They were here for the children who'd finally started breathing again. I stepped into the moonlight silhouette at the top of the stairs. "The children are gone," I called. 3 beams snapped upward. Blinding. The leader stepped forward, massive frame, scar slicing his eyebrow. Well, Barren wife." He chuckled. "Arthur said you'd beg." I tightened my grip on the poker. Arthur had called me worthless my whole life. But standing there, I realized the truth. I wasn't Barren. I was carrying an entire house on my back. Arthur was wrong about many things, I said quietly. I lifted the poker. But mostly, he was wrong about me having nothing to protect. The first intruder lunged. I swung. The iron poker collided with his helmet in a thunderous clang that echoed through the kitchen. And just like that, the war for the north side began. The moment the iron poker connected with his helmet, everything changed. The sound wasn't human. It was metallic. Violent. A bell tolling inside the skull of a man who hadn't expected resistance from the Barren wife. The impact rattled up my arms, stinging bone and muscle, but I didn't release my grip. The intruder staggered backward, boots slipping on polished wood, crashing into the second man behind him. "Get her," the leader barked. Kill the light. They hadn't come prepared for me. And that was their first mistake. I retreated deliberately into the servants' corridor, not fleeing, positioning. In the wide kitchen, they could surround me. In the corridor, they could only come one at a time. I wasn't a trained fighter. But survival teaches tactics fear never could. The second man lunged through the doorway, faster, smaller, aiming not to kill, but capture. Orders. They wanted me alive. Psychological leverage. His gloved hands grabbed for the poker shaft. I didn't pull back. I shoved forward. My full weight slammed him against the wall, metal pressing into his throat. His breath hitched. His balance broke. I drove my knee upward with everything I had left in me, years of silent humiliation compressed into one desperate strike. He crumpled, gasping. I wrenched the poker free. But the leader was already there. No hesitation. No theatrics. He raised a suppressed submachine gun, barrel a black void in the dim light. Enough, he growled. You're a fighter. I'll give you that. He stepped closer. But brass doesn't beat lead. I backed toward the nursery wing door. Behind me. For children hid in darkness trusting I would hold the line. I closed my eyes for half a breath. Not to surrender. To steady myself. If I fell here, they would reach the safe room. And everything we'd built would die with me. The leader's finger tightened on the trigger. And then the house roared. Not gunfire. An engine. A deep, predatory growl tearing up the driveway. Headlights flooded the foyer windows. Tires screeched against frozen gravel. The Tiger had come home. The front doors didn't open. They detonated inward. Min-ho Kang hadn't waited for clearance codes or compromised guards. He drove his armored SUV straight through the iron gates and into the entrance path, abandoning stealth for speed. He entered the mansion like a force of nature. Snow swirled behind him, coat whipping in the wind, gun in each hand. This wasn't the man who watched surveillance feeds beside a child's painting. This was the Tiger of the North Side fully unleashed. The leader spun, weapon pivoting. Too slow. 3 suppressed shots cracked the silence. Thud. 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 The man dropped before he understood he'd been hit. The kitchen fell into stunned stillness, the metallic scent of gunpowder and blood settling into the air. Min-ho stood in the wreckage, chest rising and falling beneath his coat. His eyes scanned the space like a battlefield commander confirming casualties. Then they found me, at the end of the corridor, still holding the iron poker. Blood flecked across my nightgown, not mine. His gaze shifted from the bodies, back to me. And something profound flickered there. Recognition. He had brought me into his home to nurture broken children. He hadn't realized. He'd brought home a lioness. The children, he asked, voice roughened by adrenaline. Safe, I breathed. Ji-hoon has them in the safe room. His shoulders dropped half an inch. Weapons fell from his hands. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and pulled me into his arms. No words. No gratitude speech. Just instinct. I leaned into him, hands still shaking around the poker. In the ruins of that kitchen, the transaction of our marriage ended. And something far more dangerous began. By 4:00 a.m., the Kang estate looked like a military compound. Floodlights bleached the marble exterior. Security teams swept corridors in silent formation. Broken glass was cleared. Blood scrubbed. Evidence erased. Efficiency over emotion. But the children's bedroom doors remained open. And guards stood outside, each one like stone sentinels. Protection had become personal. In the soundproof study, the aftermath continued. One intruder had survived my corridor stand. He sat zip-tied to a heavy oak chair, jaw swollen purple where the poker had connected. Min-ho stood before him, sleeves rolled, tiger tattoo visible along his forearm. His voice when he spoke was quieter than gunfire. Who gave you the codes? The man spat blood onto the Persian rug, grinning through broken lips. A dead man walking, Kong. Min-ho didn't blink. Arthur Weston, the intruder, continued. Talkative little rat. Sold you the security grid, nursery schedule, everything. I stood in the doorway and felt the world tilt. Arthur hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed children. He knew Yuna slept with a stuffed rabbit. He knew Hannah didn't speak. He knew Ji-hoon watched the gates. And he'd sold all of it for money. Min-ho's gaze shifted to me. Dark. Protective. Lethal. What do you want me to do with him? He asked softly. Not the man in the chair. Arthur. I stepped forward slowly. The intruder watched me like prey assessing predator. Death is mercy Arthur doesn't deserve, I said calmly. Min-ho's brow lifted slightly. He believes I'm nothing without a man's name, I continued. I want him alive. I met Min-ho's eyes. I want him to watch from the gutter while we build a kingdom on the ruins of his fear. Silence filled the study. His punishment, I finished, is seeing my happiness. The intruder swallowed hard. Because the room shifted then. Power didn't belong only to the tiger anymore. It belonged to the woman who chose mercy as a sharper blade than revenge. The next night, the house felt different. Still fortified. Still guarded. But warmer. The children no longer watched me like property. They watched me like protection. Ji-hoon found me in the kitchen, brewing chamomile tea. I saw you, he said suddenly. I turned. On the stairs. Before I took them to the cellar. You didn't flinch. I smiled faintly. I was terrified. He frowned. You didn't look it. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, I said, sliding him a mug. It's doing what needs to be done while your knees shake. He studied the tea. My father says we're moving to the lake house until the war ends. I nodded. Then he looked up raw. But who watches you? The question landed deeper than any bullet could have. I reached across the island and squeezed his hand. I've been watching myself my whole life, I said softly. But it wouldn't hurt to have a partner with a baseball bat. A ghost of a smile flickered across his face. Deal. In that quiet kitchen. The tiger's heir gave me his loyalty. Not because I was bought. Because I stood. Across the city. Shockwaves spread. Min-ho Kang didn't retreat after the breach. He escalated. He called a summit. The Council of Five. Because when men attack your home, they stop being business partners. They become enemies. And the tiger was done negotiating. The summit took place 60 floors above the city. High enough that Chicago looked less like a battlefield. And more like something men believed they owned. Glass walls wrapped the boardroom, overlooking a frozen Lake Michigan that reflected the gray weight of winter skies. The table inside was mahogany long enough to seat kings, polished enough to reflect their sins. For bosses were already seated when Min-ho Kang entered. He came alone. No secondary detail. No visible weapons. A calculated insult. Because men like him didn't need guards in rooms where fear preceded them. He took the head seat without asking permission. No greetings. No small talk. Just silence, thick enough to choke on. Then he spoke. You sent men into my home. His voice was level. Not raised. Not theatrical. Which made it far more dangerous. You targeted my children. He rested his forearms on the table, tiger ink coiling beneath rolled sleeves. And you targeted the woman who carries my name. Across from him, Elder Park leaned back in his chair, cigar smoke curling lazily from his lips. She isn't your wife, Park sneered. She's a debt you paid off. A barren discard from the south side gutter. The other bosses watched carefully. Measuring temperature. Calculating fallout. Park exhaled smoke slowly. We did you a favor trying to clear the trash. The room dropped 10 degrees. Min-ho didn't move immediately. He leaned forward slowly, eyes darkening into something colder than rage. That trash, he said quietly, held off 3 of your tactical men with a fire poker. Park's smirk faltered slightly. She bled for my family while your soldiers ran. Min-ho's voice sharpened like steel drawn from a sheath. That makes her more of a Kong than anyone in this room. Silence. He slid a thick leather file across the table and flipped it open. Not financial records. Not shipping routes. Photographs. High resolution. Surveillance detail. School pickup times. Mistress walking routes. Hospital entrances. Family. Park's cigar paused halfway to his mouth. There is no more business between us, Min-ho said. He rose slowly from his chair. From this moment forward, I am not a businessman. His eyes locked onto Park's. I am a ghost. He tapped the photographs. I have moved my family. You will never find them. Then he leaned in just slightly. But I know exactly where yours are. No one breathed. If I see a single park soldier on the north side, if I hear your name whispered in a way that displeases me. His voice dropped into something lethal. I will start at the bottom of this list. A pause. And I will not stop until the park name becomes a footnote in a history book. He closed the file, turned, walked out, and just like that, war was no longer implied. It was declared. The fallout was immediate, surgical, precise. Min-ho Kang didn't wage war like street gangs did. He dismantled enemies like machinery. Shipping hubs were raided overnight. Offshore accounts vanished into digital smoke. Alliances evaporated as neutral bosses distanced themselves from Park's collapsing syndicate. The Tiger wasn't fighting for territory anymore. He was erasing threats. Every shadow that had dared approach his front door was being hunted into extinction. But inside the estate, the war looked different. Zaria, the woman they once called Barren, wasn't tracking body counts. She was tracking trauma. Because the breach hadn't just cracked doors. It had cracked the fragile healing inside the children. Yuna refused to sleep without lights. Her tiny body trembled at every creak of the floor. Sangwoo stopped eating again, staring at plates like they might betray him. Hannah's progress slowed, her silence creeping back in like frost reclaiming ground. Ji-hoon stopped sitting at the window and started patrolling the hallways at night. Children turning into soldiers. Again. Zaria refused to let that happen. She moved her armchair from the east wing into the center of the children's hallway. Every night, she sat there. The iron fire poker leaned beside her chair like a sentinel. Not hidden anymore. A visible line in the sand. The doors to each bedroom were left cracked open exactly 3 inches. Light spilled into the hall. Not enough to wake them. Enough to comfort them. She read aloud until her voice rasped dry. Fairy tales. Adventure stories. Anything where heroes survive the dark. One night, at 2:00 a.m., Ji-hoon stepped out. He found her slumped in the chair, cardigan wrapped tight, eyes bloodshot but alert. "Why do you stay out here?" he whispered. She looked up slowly. "The guards are at the gates," he continued. "My father's hunting them. We're safe." She shook her head gently. The dark only wins if it thinks no one is watching. She adjusted the poker beside her chair. "I'm watching." A pause. "I will always be watching." He didn't argue. Didn't push back. He just nodded and went back to bed. Because for the first time since his mother died, someone else was holding the night watch. Min-ho would return before dawn. Coat dusted with snow. Gunpowder lingering in the fabric. He would find her asleep in that chair. Head tilted sideways, book fallen open in her lap. He never woke her. Never commented. He simply lifted her carefully, carried her down the hall, and placed her in bed. Every time. No witnesses. No declarations. But something inside him shifted each night he did it. Gratitude. Respect. Attachment. He had brought her in as protection for his children. He hadn't expected her to become protection for him too. Because men like Min-ho Kang didn't know how to build homes. Only fortresses. And she was turning stone into warmth. While healing slowly took root inside the estate, Zaria Weston was rotting. He hid in a condemned south side tenement, walls sweating with damp decay, air thick with stale gin and regret. The park syndicate was collapsing under Kang's warpath, and scapegoats were being hunted. Arthur knew he topped the list. He jumped at every passing car, flinched at every footstep in the hall. Because the man who sells everyone eventually runs out of people to betray. And when that happens, there's no one left to shield you. The door to his room didn't open. It was kicked off its hinges. Min-ho Kang stepped inside, shadow filling the doorway like judgment made flesh. Arthur fell to his knees instantly. "Please," he whimpered. "I didn't know they'd hurt the kids." Min-ho didn't draw his weapon. Didn't shout. Didn't rage. He simply dropped a manila envelope onto the floor. "One-way ticket," he said calmly. "Labor camp. Frozen North." Arthur blinked in confusion. "Stay in Chicago, and the parks will skin you alive for failing them." He crouched slightly, voice lowering. "Leave, and you'll live a long life of nothing." Arthur grabbed the envelope greedily. still driven by the same hunger that destroyed him. One more thing, Min-ho added. Arthur froze. She didn't ask me to kill you. Arthur's head lifted slowly. When I asked her what she wanted, Min-ho's eyes hardened. She said you weren't worth the cost of the bullet. Silence crushed the room. You aren't a man anymore, Arthur Weston, Min-ho finished. You're a debt erased from the books. As Min-ho walked out, Arthur realized the true punishment. He wasn't being executed. He was being forgotten. Back at the estate, winter began loosening its grip. Not just on the city, on the house, on the children, on Min-ho himself. The war still raged outside, but inside, healing was winning ground. Because the Barren wife had become the heartbeat of the North Side, and the Empire was starting to breathe again. Arthur Weston left Chicago before sunrise. No farewell, no redemption speech. Just a man clutching a paper envelope like it contained a future he didn't deserve but was too afraid to refuse. He boarded a northbound transport under a false name arranged by Kang's network, disappearing not into death, but into obscurity. And for a man like Arthur, obscurity was worse than execution. Because execution ends suffering. Obscurity forces you to live long enough to understand what you destroyed. No one spoke his name again inside the Kang estate. Not out of fear. Out of irrelevance. He had become what he once called Zaria. Disposable. A month passed. Winter's grip on Chicago began to crack. Ice fractured along Lake Michigan like glass breaking under pressure. The Park Syndicate had been dismantled piece by piece, absorbed, neutralized, erased. Min-ho Kang hadn't just defended his borders. He had redrawn the city's power map entirely. But when the war quieted, he didn't host a victory summit. He hosted a gala. Because this wasn't about business. It was about recognition. The estate transformed overnight. Where tactical teams once patrolled, now valets lined the drive. Where floodlights once blazed, now chandeliers glowed warm gold through every window. The mansion didn't look like a fortress anymore. It looked alive. And at the top of the grand staircase stood the woman who had made that possible. Zaria. She paused there a moment, not out of hesitation, but awareness. The last time she had stood before powerful men, her wrists were bound, her worth debated like property. Now she wore midnight blue silk that flowed like lake water under moonlight. A sapphire necklace rested at her throat, fastened by Min-ho Kang's own hands that morning. But it wasn't the gown that silenced the ballroom when she appeared. It was her eyes. Steady, unbroken, victorious without arrogance. She descended slowly, each step measured, not queen by title, but queen by endurance. At the base of the staircase waited the 4 children. Ji-hoon stood tall, not hardened now, but proud. Hannah stood beside him, hands clasped gently, her silence no longer empty, but thoughtful. Sang-woo hovered close, less withdrawn than before, eyes following Zaria like an anchor. And Yuna smiled openly. No fear, no trembling, just childhood restored. They didn't line up like soldiers anymore. They gathered around her like family. That alone told the room everything it needed to know. Min-ho Kang waited at the final step. Not in dominance. In partnership. He extended his hand, not to lead, but to walk beside her. When she took it, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Not scandal. Respect. He guided her to the center of the ballroom where the city's most dangerous figures stood watching. Then, in a gesture no one expected, the tiger bowed his head slightly toward her. Not submission. Acknowledgement. He raised his champagne glass. To the heart of the North Side. The words hung in the air like a coronation decree. The room followed suit, glasses lifting in synchronized tribute. They weren't toasting his wealth, his power, his violence. They were toasting the woman who had turned his empire into a home. Zaria glanced around the ballroom, then at Min-ho. And in that moment, she understood the greatest lie Arthur Weston had ever told her. She was never barren. She had birthed a family out of grief, courage, and refusal to break. She was the most fertile soul in the room. Spring arrived not gently, but violently. Ice shattered along the lakefront. Snow retreated from the estate grounds. And inside the conservatory, life returned. The bulbs Hannah had planted with trembling hands began to bloom. Siberian irises pushed stubbornly through the soil. Tulips opened like small declarations of survival. Zaria walked through the glass hall one morning, sunlight pouring across her shoulders. Min-ho sat waiting on the stone bench, legal documents resting in his lap. He looked different in daylight. Less myth, more man. The adoption papers are finalized, he said quietly. She stilled. He handed her the documents. If anything happens to me, the estate, the businesses, guardianship, it all transfers to you. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read the names. Ji-hoon Kang, Hannah Kang, Sang-woo Kang, Yuna Kang, and beneath them, Clara Zaria Kang. You are no longer a guest here, he said softly. A pause. You are the foundation. The words settled into her chest like warmth spreading through frozen bone. She ran her fingertips over the ink, feeling the weight of a legacy she'd been told she could never have. But Min-ho wasn't finished. There's one more thing. He nodded toward the front gate. A black sedan had just arrived. A social worker stepped out, followed by a small boy clutching a suitcase bound in twine. Terrified eyes. Discarded posture. Familiar pain. The South Side orphanage contacted us, Min-ho said. He reminded me of someone. Zaria's breath caught. Someone the world had tried to discard. The boy approached hesitantly, staring at the massive estate like it might swallow him whole. Zaria didn't wait for introductions. She walked forward, then knelt in the dirt, just as she had on the night she first arrived. Hi, she said gently, her voice warm enough to thaw fear. I'm Zaria. She smiled softly. I've been waiting a long time for you. She extended her hand. Would you like to see the garden? We have a lot of work to do, and I could use some help. The boy looked at her, then at the blooming flowers behind her, then back at her face, the first face that had ever looked at him like he mattered. He reached out slowly and took her hand. The fifth legacy had arrived. The story of the Barren wife and the tiger became legend in Chicago's underworld. Whispered in back rooms. Spoken in cautionary tones. A reminder that power wasn't always built with guns. Sometimes, it was built with bread, with patience, with a woman who refused to let broken children stay broken. Inside the estate, life moved differently now. Piano lessons echoed through the halls. The smell of rosemary bread replaced gun oil in the kitchen. Laughter, loud, chaotic, imperfect, filled rooms that once held only silence. And sometimes, late at night, a thunderous roar of laughter would echo from Min-ho Kang himself. Because the tiger had finally learned how to live inside the home he once only defended. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the Chicago skyline, painting the estate grounds in amber light, Zaria sat on the porch beside him. 5 children played in the grass, chasing each other through sprinklers, their shadows long and joyful. Min-ho took her hand, thumb brushing the gold band on her finger. You changed the ending, he said quietly. She leaned her head against his shoulder. No, she whispered. A soft smile touched her lips. I just started a new book. She watched the children run. The first one was only the prologue. Her gaze drifted to the iron gates. Still strong. Still formidable. But their purpose had changed. They weren't there to keep the world out anymore. They were there to keep the love in. And Zaria Weston, the woman once told she had no legacy, looked at her 5 children, the man who had truly seen her, and realized she was finally, perfectly, whole.